So I was going through some of my old papers, and I found one that I had done in a class on emotion, and I thought that it highlighted or was a good example for an interesting distinction, and that distinction is the difference between a normative statement and a descriptive statement, or a prescription and a description. So, a descriptive statement says something about the world and it attempts to capture the world or draw a map of the world and doesn't say anything about whether that's good or bad. A prescriptive statement is a statement about how the world ought to be, or a statement on how one should conduct themselves in a certain situation, or something to that effect. So, a fairly simple example is the gender pay gap. Okay, if you say that there is a gender pay gap, that's a descriptive claim. Um, Now, if you say that something should be done to lower that gap, that's a normative claim or a prescriptive claim, right? You're saying something about how the world ought to be, not just describing how it is. And the descriptive, these two aren't entirely separate from each other because descriptive claims inform what the prescription is, right? You take your worldview and you ask who, what, when, where, why, how, those types of things, and then you put your description of the world and you funnel it through what your values are, and based on what your values are, that spits out what the prescription is. Okay? And normative claims in philosophy, cover things like ethics, what's moral, and aesthetics, and they tend to be more embodied in the human condition, or embodied is probably not the right word, but they tend to be more involved in the human condition and less abstract. Descriptive claims tend to be abstract. And where this comes in with emotion, and I messed up on where I drew the emotional views, is emotion is an interesting case where I think that the the correct description is the William James's interpretation of emotion, which is the non-cognitive view, which is that your body experiences an emotion, and then your brain appraises it after the experience. And that's juxtaposed against the cognitive view, or the view that the Stoics might have, in which you make an appraisal of a situation, and then after your appraisal, the appraisal causes the emotion. Okay? So, James's view is that the emotions come first, and then the appraisal comes. And evidence seems to indicate that this is the case. You have instances of the Pygmalion effect. Pygmalion effect is things you believe to be true tend to become true. It's named after, I think the legend of Pygmalion was a sculptor who, in Greek mythology, he made a sculpture and he fell in love with it, and he wanted it to be real so bad it became real, or a god made it real, something like that. But the things you believe to be true tend to become true. In the case of emotion, with the Jamesian view, which is that emotions precede your judgment, you can do something like put a pencil between your teeth, and there have been studies like this, and hold it there in a smile position, and it will make you happier. And so it's the embodied physical smiling that causes you to be happy, not an appraisal of the situation that makes you happy, right? And then they did another one where you put the pencil in between your lips, like your lips are pursed around it, which is more of a frown, and that tend to make people less happy. There are other instances in which it seems to be the case that the emotion is not caused by cognitive appraisal, but instead by physical embodiment. Okay, so the Jamesian view is the view I think is the more accurate description. However, I think it's entirely possible, once again, invoking the Rosenthal effect, or the things you tend to believe are true, tend to become true. I believe it's possible that the correct prescription for emotion is the cognitive view. And the cognitive view is a view that's embodied by, or not embodied, that was held by the Stoics in ancient Greece, which is that your assessment of a situation precedes your emotion. And what the Stoics believed is that because that's the case, what you should do is you should practice the skill of assessing your life in such of a way that you have great control over your emotions. Okay? And a lot of it is taking responsibility for your life and that type of stuff, or focusing on things that are within your control and not letting things outside your control bother you. So the Stoics have a prescription, and that prescription is to try and capture as much control over their emotions as possible by controlling their evaluation of their life situation. Now, so we have these two models. We have the Stoic model and the Jamesian model. The Jamesian model seems to have more evidence, but it's possible that one should believe in the Stoic model. And that's because if you believe you have more control over your emotions, you have the Rosenthal effect, wherein things you believe to become true tend to become true. And it's possible that just believing you have more control actually gives you more control. And the reason it's called, I said Rosenthal effect. It's called Rosenthal or Pygmalion effect. Rosenthal was a psychologist who in the 80s did a study where I think it was the 80s, where he randomly separated two groups and told a teacher that group A, let's say, were expected to be gifted and group B were expected to be regular kids, and they were randomly selected. But at the end of the year, group A significantly outperformed group B. And the teacher wasn't intentionally trying to push this, but the idea is that the teacher's expectations of the students alone caused those students to be pushed up, the ones that were supposed to be gifted, or she was told that they were gifted. So just the expectation of the teacher. So, coming back to the Stoics, if your expectation is that you can control your emotions, you might gain more access to control over your emotions. If you have the Jamesian view, and that's what you believe, then you, to some degree, are a slave to how your body reacts, and you cannot engage in mental processing to try and avoid or control emotions. Now, I made this argument in an essay I wrote on emotion, but reading back over it, I think that there's a third possibility, which is that if you adopt the Jamesian view, what you can do is you can engage in more useful behavior. Going back to the pencil study, if you accept the Jamesian view, then you can engage in more behavior where you're being intentional with how your embodied experience is as it relates to emotion. So every time you're driving to work, let's say, you can put a pencil between your teeth, forcing yourself to smile, which in turn would make you more happy. So it's unclear as to which view might be better. But let's bring it back to description versus prescription, right? Because that's where we started. And the conclusion was it's unclear what you should believe in regards to emotional models. At least I think it is. I think the better description is the Jamesian one. But oftentimes people, I don't want to bag on people in a general sense, but the a lot of times people will infer that a normative claim is being made every time someone makes a descriptive claim. So if I say there's a gender pay gap, what people infer is something should be done about the gender pay gap, which isn't the case. I can make a descriptive claim without making a prescriptive claim. Also, uh, you have to, let's talk the gender pay gap specifically. If we're describing that in our like who, what, when, where, in our W's, and we're pumping it through our values, what value is it that makes us think that something should be done about the pay gap is an interesting thing to think about, because the idea is most people, if their values, they value egalitarian types of social organization, and if that's your value, and you feel that women are paid less because they are women, then of course you want to change it, right? But that women are paid less, it's not necessarily clear that they are paid less entirely because they are women, right? And you can study the data. I'm not familiar with the data, but uh, I've heard people argue from both sides saying that the data supports their claims. So I've heard people say that doing the exact same job and you control for everything else, women get paid less. In which case, I would agree with the normative claim that something ought to be done by it. And I've heard people make the other claim that there are other differences other than gender that tend to occur, and those differences can account for the pay gap difference. Like one of those differences being that men and women choose different jobs, and if that's the case, then I don't have a problem with different pay. And so, understanding which descriptive claims are informing normative claims can lead to greater clarity. But just knowing the difference between a descriptive claim and a prescriptive or normative claim can allow you to better understand what people are saying, and also not necessarily infer that they are making a prescriptive claim when they're just describing the world. Although often people make prescriptive claims by making a descriptive claim, but being able to pick the two apart allows you to have a more fine-toothed comb for analyzing discussions or discourse of whatever kind. Anyways, that's it. So.